In the previous Shiur, the Shiur Akdama, we spoke when you're actually giving tzedakah, but be'ikah we focus in the believe, giving tzedakah, how to give tzedakah. We said you have to give benedivas, to want to give, at kedei kach, if a person has a hard time giving, he's over a lav, lefi the Ramban. In today's Shiur, Bais Hashem, I would like to focus from a different angle. First of all, when you're giving tzedakah, the schar of tzedakah, and also, could you give tzedakah with having in mind to get that schar, to get that reward? We'll start with what's mavur in Chazal. The Scheiner brings in the beginning of Hilchos Tzedakah, Siman Reish Mem Zayin, that if a person gives tzedakah, he becomes wealthy. The Ramah says, Ma'asheres, you become wealthy when you give tzedakah. The Mechaber brings that not only besides becoming wealthy, it's also a shmira. Tzedakah tatzal limavis, hatzedakah doiches ha'gezeres ha'koshois. On the note of shmira, the Medrash in next week's parsha, by Yider Yaakov Neder, sagt the Medrash that Bais Tzara, Noidrim, Yaakov Avinu made a Neder, and the Neder was to give tzedakah. Al Kapanim, giving tzedakah is a shmira, giving tzedakah you become wealthy. What's the makoyer that when you give tzedakah you become wealthy? The pasuk in Parshas Re'ei Aser Ta'aser Es Kol Tvua Zaracha. Why does it have to say aser to aser? Speaking about taking off trumas or meiseris, meiser, aser to aser. Meiser, you should take meiser. Why can't I just say aser is called tvua zaracha? What's aser to aser? Zok the Gemara in Tainis, aser b'shvil shittis asher. Give meiser, and b'schus giving meiser, you'll become a oisher. Now the emes is that the pasuk is really not speaking about giving tzedakah. The pasuk is talking about giving meiser, like the pasuk says, mitvuas zaracha. Now Tosfos brings the Sefri. The Sefri says, minayin l'rabois. This that the Gemara says that you become wealthy, aser b'shvil shittis asher. How do you know that that's maybe it's only by tvua? Zok the Sefri, Kollel tvua zaracha. Kollel is l'rabbis, everything else as well also. L'rabbis, anything that you gain, any money that you gain, prakmatri, you gain money. If you give meiser, you become wealthy. Now, the sugya of giving meiser is a shiur for itself. Is it the raisa? Is it the rabbanon? Is it minig? But al koponim zok the pasuk aser ta aser and Chazal darshan that if you give meiser, not only meiser on the two, if you give meiser on your money, you become wealthy. We're talking about tzedakah in general. Meiser is a oifen of nesinas tzedakah. In Siman Reish Mem Tes, over there the Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Dinei nesinas tzedakah. In the Shulchan Aruch it says, Dr. Shulchan Aruch about giving meiser. One of the oifanei nesinas tzedakah is by giving meiser. And over there the Goyen says, giving meiser, aser to aser. The Taz in Hilchos Trumas is even more clear like that it's a oifen of tzedakah. Al koponim, if somebody gives tzedakah, like the Shulchan Aruch says, I wouldn't call it a school, it's the schar ha-mitzvah. Right, you find other places also. Kibira ve'em l'man yerichon yamecha. Here the Torah says, mefurish l'man yerichon yamecha. Here Chazal darshan that if a person gives tzedakah, meiser, gives tzedakah, these are shiuros, you become wealthy. Just on the note that we connected meiser, tzedakah, and meiser of tvua, so we have to mention that in this week's parsha, Yitzchak, it says, the pasuk says, "Vayizra Yitzchak be'eretz ahu vayimtza b'shana me'er sha'arim." So Rashi brings some Chazal, he gave Maisris. The Rambam says that Adam Arishan, what was by Noach, Avram Avinu, and Yitzchak, so the Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, the Yitzchak Hifresh Meiser. Okay, this is Lamaimer Amuska, we're talking about Tzedakah, not Meiser. Just we connected, but Al Kaponim, what's clear is that if somebody gives Tzedakah, is Mevur, it's a Ashiris. The Gemara in Ksuba says, Meloich Mammon, you want to preserve your money, Chaser, which means Machaser, to make your money less. So what does that mean? Rashi explains, the way to hold on to your money, Chaser, is by giving it to Tzedakah. Dr. Rashi, you want to hold on to your money, Koloimer ligram loishi yiskayim, to hold on to your money. Yachzerenu letzedakah. You should give tzedakah. Tamar v'chesroinai. That's how he's going to hold on to it. That also the Shulchan Aruch says, of course, the Rambam already says that if a person gives tzedakah, he definitely doesn't lose. But Zok the Torah Tamima, the Makar for this Gemara is aser to aser. One other thing, Lamaimer Amusker, speaking about aser to aser, these 3 times in the year that we lane later after Aser to Aser, Kol HaBechor, Achron Shal Pesach, the second day Shavuos in Chutz La'aretz, and Shmini Atzeres. If it's Shabbos, you need more aliyahs, then you start from Aser to Aser. Aser to Aser is before Kol HaBechor. However, Shmini Atzeres, you always start from Aser to Aser, even when it's not Shabbos. Why? Why is it like that? Zokta Levush, Chag HaAsiv, because it's a time that a person brings in his money, so we lay in Aser to Aser to remind the person to give money, to give tzedakah. On the haftacha of Aser to Aser, that if you give tzedakah, you're going to become wealthy, is mevur in the Alshach. The same says also the Shach, but not the Shach on Shulchan Aruch, the Shach that's a Talmud of the Arizal. The same also the Kedushas Levi and the Noam Elimelech. They all say the same Yisoid. They touch, where do you see, where is it merumas when the Torah says Aser to Aser, that it means that you're going to become wealthy. Aser to Aser, Aser b'shvil shittas Asher. Where do you see it? So you see they all explain the same Yisoid. That the Torah is saying, let's say you have a field with 100 core of tevuah. So Meiser is 10 core. Aser, if you take 10 core off the 100, which really comes out that the whole 100 is part of the mitzvah, Memela b'shvil shetes Asher, the says, why are you going to become an usher? Because what's going to be next year is going to be your whole meiser. Meaning to say is this year you took 10 out of 100. Next year the whole 100 is going to be a meiser, which means you're going to make 1,000. That's what the Torah is saying. Aser b'shvil shetes asher shetes asher. They also want to say b'shvil shetes aser. That means that what your whole field this year is going to be meiser next year. Al kaponim. That's how it's merumas where the Torah says Aser to Aser, it's referring to the Meiser, that everything becomes Meiser.
The more you give, the more you'll get back.
The more you'll have next year to give. If you give 10 out of 100, next year you'll have 1,000 that you'll be able to give the whole 100.
Yeah,
everything
20,
you have now.
Yeah, and if I give 20, also, I guess up until a finish,
Yeah, Al Yivaz is Yosem HaChaimish. They also say the flip side as well also, that if a person doesn't give the Meiser, then unfortunately next year, what he was supposed to give Meiser, the Hainu 10% to 10 core, his whole field is going to be just Meiser, just the 10%.
Where's the remnants for that?
What?
Where's the remnants for that?
Rashi says,
somewhere else, not it's just Kedosh
Lo Yeh, that the whole thing is going to... None of them actually bring it into Sant. Oh. Now, Atkan, that if a person gives tzedakah he becomes, the Torah, the Chazal say, you become a oisher, you become wealthy. The shaila is, could you give tzedakah for that reason? Or could you give tzedakah for a school of a Yidir Yaakov neder? He made a neder for protection. Tzedakah tatzal mamavis. So the Emma says it's a mafurish Gemara. The Gemara in Pesachim says somebody that gives tzedakah al manas sheyichya b'ni, I raise a tzaddik gomer. Not only that if somebody gives tzedakah al manas sheyichya b'ni that you're allowed to do it, that there's no problem, you're a tzaddik gomer. What's the pshat? What's the pshat in tzaddik gomer? Why tzaddik gomer? L'chayr you have to be mechavan to the mitzvah. So already mentioned in Rashi, in the previous year, Rashi says, Kayem mitzvahs boyrei kiyem mitzvahs boyrei shetzivah l'aseh tzedakah. Avada, he was makayim the mitzvah, and he was mechavan, he's doing it because that's the ratzon Hashem. Umischaven af lahanoes atzmoi. In other words, these are dual kavana. He has a kavana avada to give because shekein tziva boyrei. On top of that, also he's also giving tzedakah al manas sheyichya b'ni, and memela it's beseder. The Chaim, spells it out in Avos Chesed. He spells this out. He says like this: Ulechein af shekiven sheyeh lo gamkin hano mizeh. You're giving the tzedakah besides because you want to give, because that's the ratzon Hashem. You're also giving. You have hano. Person wants his name on the building. Sheyichya b'ni ashiris loinis batal ha-mitzvah. So that's what he said. Malva afapi came mikri mitzvah gemura kiven shebe'emes machav alasas ha-mitzvah sheksuva b'Torah. Of course he's giving tzedakah because that's the ratzon Hashem. But on top of that also, besides that, he also wants that the Eibusher should be mated with him. So Meila, you makayim the mitzvah. The Chazanish says the same Yisrael also, the Gava mitzvah shichas kavan and Yevamas. We mentioned this already, that even though you have another kavana, he brings a mashal esrog, you have a beautiful esrog. You're taking the esrog because the Eibush said to take an esrog. But on top of that also you have kavana la mitzvah, the kavana, everybody should see you have a beautiful esrog. It's not megarei in the mitzvah. At kedei kach, we see the Gemara says, it's not just that it's b'diavad. The Gemara calls this person a tzaddik gomer. Tosfos over there asks, how could it be that he's a tzaddik gomer? The Mishnah in Avos says, al tihi kavodim hamashamshen masarav lekabel pras. He's doing it, he's giving tzedakah because he wants to become wealthy. So maybe he could do it, but he's a tzaddik gomer. The Mishnah says, Alti kavadim shamsham makabel pras. You're not supposed to do something to get a reward. Over here you're doing it to get a reward. So Tosfos says Miyashav, and Tosfos says that the Mishnah in Avos says don't do it to get a reward, is that if you don't get the reward, you have charota that you did it. Kitoya ala rishonis. But if you don't have charota, it's okay. Pashtus with Rashi's Yisoid, the teretz would be this, that it says don't do something to get a reward. That's if you only do it for the reward. But if you do it for both, the hainu sai for the ratzon aboyrem, besides that also for a reward, that's beseder. It's not only beseder, it's tzaddik gomer. The Marsha in Ksubas asks, as well as Rabbi Chanan, here the Gemara says in Pesachim that when a person gives tzedakah with an alternative motive, he has a different idea, something else in mind why he's giving tzedakah, he's still makayim the mitzvah nareza tzaddik gomer. They ask from the Gemara in Ksubas, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, a Maisi was going and he saw a lady collecting kernels in the garbage. Lamaisa, this lady was the daughter of Nakdim ben Gurion. and he was the chazanim, a farnus, he gave a lot of tzedakah, he helped out. So he explained why was it that he lost his money. What happened to the money? He lost his money. Why? So the Gemara says, because everything that he gave was l'chvoidai. He did it, he gave the money to get honor. So that's why he lost the money. Frekta Marsha, since when is there a problem to do it l'chvoidai? We just said, the Gemara says, that you're allowed to do the mitzvah, nesinas tzedakah, to become wealthy. That it should be a shmir al manashi yichye benoi. You're allowed to give tzedakah because you want to become wealthy. So what's the problem? Why did Nakdim ben Gurion lose his money? Because he did it l'chvoidai. What's the problem that he did it l'chvoidai?
So you need a dual that you're also doing for us on.
Oh, very good, very good. Maybe you're going to tell me that Hitaka didn't have both. He only did a l'chvoidai. Very good. Very good. Rabbi Chaim himself says, maybe I'll tell you that over there it's l'chvoidai. He says it's not possible. The Akdim ben Gurion, the Gemara says, is one of the 4 people that the sun was held up. It's not shaykh that he did it only l'chvoidai. That he did it both, also l'chvoidai, I hear. But only l'chvoidai, he left out that he didn't even do it because that's the Ratzon Hashem. That's very hard. It's not shaykh to say. So how do we understand why the Gemara says he lost his money because he did a l'chvoidai? How do you understand that he lost his money because he did a l'chvoidai? We just saw that you're allowed to have another kavana as well. So they both answer, which is be'etzem a very scary teretz. They both say that be'etzem you can have another kavana included. However, if the other kavana is l'chvoidai, that's a problem. If it's, you have another kavana, amanashi yichye beni, like the Gemara says, a shmira, protection, you want to become wealthy, you do it to become wealthy, that's okay. Not only it's okay if you do it l'shem mitzvah and to become wealthy, zok the Gemara, you're a tzaddik gomer. You're a tzaddik gomer. However, if you give tzedakah to get honor from it, that's already problematic. It's problematic to the extent not only you're not a tzaddik gomer, but the Gemara says that Akdim ben Gurion lost his money. And the emes is that it's the Shulchan Aruch says this. The Lashon, the Bais Yosef quotes it. He brings from the Smak Tzarech Hanoisen. When you give tzedakah, shelo yispar b'tzedakah shenoisen, not to be mispar, to honor yourself. The mispar, and if a person does give tzedakah to get honor, to make himself chashav with the tzedakah, lo dayo she'einoi mekabel schar. Not only you don't have the schar of tzedakah, nor even more that ela shemanisha, so you get a einish. So it's scary if a person gives tzedakah because he wants to become wealthy. He wants sheyichya ben olam haba. So like the Gemara is a tzaddik gomer. But if a person does it l'chvoidai, not only is not a tzaddik gomer, he can even he gets a einish. There is, however, another teretz in Lahiris Nasa, and he says that the reason by be'etzem Hitaka did it both l'shem Hashem u l'shem tzedakah l'shem l'chvoidai. But for him, it was a tiny. He was an Adam Chashav. He shouldn't have done it. A regular person, Taka, could do it l'shem Hashem u l'chvoid atzmai. For him, it was a tiny. So this teretz, the Lahiris Nasa, minimizes the be'etzem. Even l'chvoid be'etzem, a regular person wouldn't have been a tiny. For him, it was a tiny, even though it was together. What'd say?
Shot in his pillow. Why is the chvoidai knock it out while everything else? Okay.
What's the taina? So they bring the what's saying? So what does it mean l'chvoida? I looked. They quote when he says this. They bring the Chovos Halvavos, and I looked over there. I didn't see where he taiches al gabe tzedakah. what's l'chvaydi gets honor? We said last week that a person has to know that the money that he has is really he's holding on to the ani's money. When he's doing it, the pshat is he's doing it because he's the kol yachol. He knows the Eibishter gave it to him. No, but he's giving it. He has his name on the building. What's taka the taina? What's taka pshat in the din? The Shulchan Aruch says if a person does l'chvaydi, then not only doesn't makabel, he don't get schar. There's even a oynish.
The motive is very clear there. I mean, opposed to al nash yechevani, it's not directly correlated to him. It's more there's the code is solely for the individual, opposed to having an ulterior motive.
But you could do it for yourself also. You're allowed to give money because you know you have a mind that when you give money you're going to become wealthy. You're giving money because you want to become wealthy.
Yeah, but that's not covered.
No, I understand. But I thought you were saying cover the thing is for yourself. A person wants for himself the money also.
The chashiva, so he's putting himself, his goal is to put himself in a circumstance where he's going to get more, let me stand up for the guy, he's a gvir. Opposed to like, okay, I'm going to do this other thing. I want to come an usher, but it's not like his motive.
He's saying l'chvaydai, like anyway, like he's in charge. That's
solely it's for own personal benefit, opposed to meaning for his ego.
I hear. What were you saying? That what?
Like the spar means you.
The spar that it's really him, not the Eibishter. Lamaisa, even though we said that giving tzedakah, we saw Rashi, we saw the Achronim, that if you give both l'shem mitzvah u l'shem to gain from the mitzvah is a reizet tzaddik gomer, but if a person only gives for a different reason, he's taka not a tzaddik gomer, but you still have the mile of tzedakah. It's very important to know. This is mavur. It doesn't answer any questions, but Rabbi Chana goes on to explain, as well in another shtickle. There's a Bais Halevi about it. The son of the Noidi that brings this in the name of his father. That tzedakah is different than other mitzvahs. By other mitzvahs, if you do the mitzvah shaloi l'shma, even without the din of shaloi l'shma, why are you doing the mitzvah? You're taking the lulav. If you don't have a mind, you're doing it because the Eibishter told you to take the daled minim. So why are you taking the daled minim? Ma'asheged by tzedakah, hayois the ani gains, he benefits, he got money from this person. So even if you only had a mind that sheyichya bani, you had a mind that he should become, that the person, he has a mind he wants to become wealthy. But since the poil yoitza, the outcome of the mitzvah is what's needed over here by tzedakah. What's needed is that the ani should be fed. So even if the person, the oisher, is giving the money and he has a reason because he wants to become even a bigger oisher, lamaisa he's accomplishing that the ani has food. So memela, even though the Gemara says that if you do it al manash yichya b'ni, Harezet tzaddik gomer, like Rashi says, you have both kavanas in mind. However, even if you don't have kavana l'shem Hashem, you don't have that kavana l'shem mitzvah, still you makayim. You still makayim the mitzvah. And they explain with this that we find Yirmiyahu Hanavi was mispalel to the Rabbeinu Shalom, that the tzedakah that the Yidden were giving shouldn't end up by aniyim, by people that need it. The shaila is, and let's say it doesn't end up by people that need it. L'maisa, if you give tzedakah, chishev la'asos mitzvah, it's ki'ilunis, it's ma'ila olav hakasav, like you did it. So what difference does it make that l'maisa the tzedakah it doesn't end up by the ani? L'maisa, you have a mind to give. You give the ani. So they say Avada Yirmiyah Hanavi knew that they didn't have a mind. They didn't have a mind b'chlal to give to the ani. They had a mind for themselves. It should save them. Narvas, if it would end up by your ani, so even like we said now, even if you don't have a kavanah b'chlal, if the poil yoitza happens that the ani is nisparnis, you get the schar. Even if a person doesn't have kavanah b'chlal, if money falls out of your pocket and the ani gets it, it's a weiter. he's nesparnis. So he's mispalo that the money shouldn't end up by an ani. There's no kavana for tzedakah, and if it doesn't end up by an ani, so then there's no mitzvah b'chlal. But often, if a person gives tzedakah for two reasons, harei tzad gomer. But even if you don't give l'shem mitzvah, it's still considered tzedakah. Me'idach, it's not, what'd say?
There's two ways to get it, basically.
If you give,
Either he receives it or you give it with the right intention. Either way, you have the tzedakah.
right, but if you give it with the right kavanah, then you're a tzad gomer. Me'idach, the Chaim says that even if you give it without the right kavanah, it's not a mitzvah. It's not so partial. This that we said now, that if you give tzedakah only almanas to gain from it, you makayim a mitzvah. The Chaim says you're not makayim the mitzvah. So shaila. However, just to conclude, what we just said now is that if a person gives tzedakah l'shem Hashem and also for his own benefit, harei tzad gomer, and if a person gives tzedakah only for his own benefit, pashtus, he's still makayim the mitzvah. The Chaim says not. But what's important to note is that there's another level on top of tzad gomer, that somebody should give the tzedakah without having in mind to gain out of the mitzvah. It's important to note that as well. Also, the Chaim speaks it out. The Yoser Tovim u'Mechav b'Mitzvah rak l'shem Hashem shitziva al zeh b'Torah. Of course, what we just said now is that avad, if you do it l'shem mitzvah and also to gain harei tzad gomer, but he's definitely on top of this yet even a more of a madrega, just to give tzedakah just because that's the Ratzon Hashem. Should be zeichet hakiti makayim the mitzvah tzedakah kitikuna.